So it is being recorded. So just so you know, this will be shared with everyone who registered. Your cameras and your mics are disabled during the talk for the attendees, but please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A functions if you have any questions during the presentations. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session as well, so you can use the raise hand function. And then we're going to enable your mics and cameras, and you can ask your questions as well. Closed captions are enabled for the event, so you can turn them on by clicking on the three dots on the top, and then language and speech, and then turn on live captions. Just please don't change the language, because that's the spoken language. It's not going to translate it for you. It's just going to make a mess for everyone else. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to quickly go through some general tips and advice about disclosure. These are just some guidelines that we at Open Doors usually share with our participants to help them become more confident and prepare to disclose personal information in a work context. Then we're going to have 4 expert talks. They will share specific advice for groups that may encounter these situations more often. So this includes trans people, individuals with disabilities, people with a criminal conviction, and travelers. After that, we're going to have a short panel discussion with these experts about their own lived experience, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. So let's start with what we mean by disclosure. So in a work context, it's a term for sharing something about yourself at work or during the recruitment process, usually sensitive information and something that's not necessarily visible to others. Today, we are focusing on 4 groups that often have to go through this procedure of disclosing information. So that includes people with a disability, trans and non-binary folks, people with a criminal history, and travelers and Roma. And that's really because individuals who are part of these communities might face additional challenges at work or trying to access employment because there's a fear of being discriminated against. And we understand how nerve-wracking this can be. So the idea of today's workshop is really to explore ways that we can get more comfortable with disclosure and try to turn it into a more positive experience for both the individual and the company. So in most cases, the vast majority of cases, disclosure is a personal choice. So unless you need to disclose something because you need a work accommodation, for example, it is usually going to be up to you as an individual if you want to disclose or not. What we advise is that before you decide if you want to disclose, is to consider why you want to talk about this, what you should and shouldn't share, when to talk about it, who to talk to, and how to disclose. So we're going to go through these in a bit more detail now. So starting with why talk about it. So it's important to understand this, and I would argue this is the most important bit. The reason can be because you need or want some type of work accommodation or support. So for example, someone who has a disability might need an assistive technology, for example, or some flexibility at work. Or someone who's trans might want to have their pronouns changed, like in the company database, for example. Another reason can be to help show your strengths or growth. So for example, someone who has a criminal conviction might want to share this as part of their story, as a learning experience, and they can focus on how much they've grown since then. In some cases, it can be important that the company is aware that the person has a disability, for example, in case of a medical emergency, or for trans people when discussing time off for medical procedures, for example. And then the final reason that we have listed here is simply because you want to. You might feel like this is a big part of your identity and you want to share this in the workplace, and that's absolutely valid. So if you want to, absolutely, that's a big reason why to talk about it. And the reason I say that why is so important, it's because it's going to influence all these other things that you need to consider. So the second step is to understand what you should share. So this depends a lot on the why. Our advice here is to keep it brief and straight to the point, especially if you're still in the recruitment phase. A lot of people tend to get a bit nervous when sharing information like this, and then they share too much, and they might overwhelm the other person, and then might not get the reaction that they were hoping for. So, depending on your why, the reason that you decided to talk about it, try to share what is relevant in that context. Then the third step is to define when you talk about it. So again, once you know your why and what information you want to share, what you need to decide is when you will do it. This will again depend on your reason, on your why. So if you're requesting an accommodation for a job interview, this obviously has to be done during the recruitment process and before that job interview. If you're already an employee at a company, then that can be done at a later stage. In any case, it's very important to find the appropriate moment. Disclosure shouldn't really be, the first thing you bring up in a conversation. It's certainly not the most important thing about you. So, and especially in a job interview in the recruitment process, try to wait and find for a moment when it feels natural and relevant to the conversation. Then, in terms of who to talk to, sometimes it can be very difficult to make this decision if you're unsure who will be the most appropriate person. And the answer here was going to depend on your why and on your when. So, if you're disclosing during the recruitment process, you'll likely have someone from HR or talent acquisition who has been communicating with you, for example, to invite you to a job interview. Then you could talk to that person. The company should also have an email and a phone number on the job description for work accommodations, so you can reach out to them. After you're already part of the company as an employee, you might decide to speak with your manager, with HR, with a trusted colleague. So there are many options, and it is a personal choice. There might also be employee resource groups that you can get advice from. So these are groups of employees who are passionate about supporting specific groups like people with disabilities, travelers, people from the LGBTQIA plus community, and so on. So it's also a good resource to tap into. There might also be an accessibility or access officer, depending on the size of the company, and that person would be able to assist people with disability who are requesting work accommodations. And finally, how to talk about it. So you can choose between a written statement, for example, via email, or verbal communication. So just having an in-person or online chat. This is a personal choice. Choose whatever feels more comfortable for you. What we would advise, though, is that if you decide to go with verbal communication, follow up with an email afterwards. It's really important that there's a record of the information that you shared, and it's also good to ensure clarity for both sides. If you're disclosing in person, another thing to pay attention to is to just make sure that you're in a private and comfortable place, especially if you're sharing any sensitive information. And a good tip here is to prepare a disclosure statement. So this is going to help you organize your thoughts and just feel more confident when disclosing. So what is a disclosure statement? So a disclosure statement is a short summary of information about you and the information that you want to share. So this is a document, not a document, it's a piece of paper that helps you clearly control and communicate the information as you choose. So it's good here to have basically, a short summary of what you want about you and what you want to share, but also when appropriate, try to include the relevance to that professional role. So there might be some skills that you have and that you have developed because of certain challenges that you have faced. And these skills might be a strength for performing that specific role that you're applying for. So in the recruitment process, it's really good to be able to connect these things. And these might be very obvious to you because it's part of your day to day. But for other people, they might not understand that yet. So it's good to include that in there so they are educated on it as well, and it can make a big difference on how people react when they see this is actually a strength instead of just focusing on potential weaknesses. And finally, highlight positive impacts when possible. So, for example, for someone with a criminal conviction, you might want to emphasize positive change, like mentioning training programs, new skills acquired, or positive contributions to the community as well. Just some final tips before we go into the expert talks in terms of that disclosure statement. We would recommend writing it down and practicing it out loud in front of a mirror, for example. This is really going to help you become more comfortable and just refine your message before you're actually doing it for real. Also seek feedback, so get people that you trust, like friends and family, to hear your disclosure statement like you would in a professional setting and give you feedback, because this can help you improve how you deliver that and make it more impactful as well. And just be ready for different reactions. The person might react in a way that you're not exactly expecting. They might have questions, they might have concerns. So it's good to think about what other people might ask after your statement is shared, and just prepare thoughtful responses that highlight, again, going back to positive impact. And respect their response. So respect that people have different feelings, they might have different concerns, and just give them a bit of time to process that information as well. So that was it for me. Now we have our expert talks. So these are going to be approximately 5 minutes each. If any of our expert speakers are talking too much, I will have to interrupt them. I'm very sorry about this. Just to make sure that we have enough time for our panel and the Q&A at the end as well. So I'd like to kick off this part of the webinar by introducing Erin Fox, who is our first speaker. Erin, I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself, if that's okay, and just let me know when you'd like me to go to the next slide as well.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Talita. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin. I'm very happy to be here today. I am profoundly deaf. I have a cochlear implant, which I've had the last 12 years. And just to give you a bit of context, I lost my hearing at the age of 9 years old, and it was just a minor high frequency hearing loss for 10 years. And then when I started my undergraduate degree in journalism, at the very start of my career, it's just deteriorated very suddenly and left me profoundly deaf. So to cut a long story short, I'm now working with Drury, a PR agency, and I've been here 2.5 years now. And storytelling is a vital part of our work in Drury when it comes to communicating important messages. And it's why I'm always very happy to share my story and personal experiences of losing my hearing to communicate the realities of managing a disability, and in my case, deafness. So I know the slides say that some of the ways I share deaf awareness messages is through stand-up comedy, and most recently on First Dates Ireland this year. So that's all true. I think that just with the stand-up comedy, I think that humor is a very powerful way to connect with people and leave a lasting impression. So anytime I try to communicate a deaf awareness message, I try to bring a little bit of fun and humor to it. And I'll give you an example. So when I tell people that it's a fact that deafness is one of the most socially isolating disabilities out there, I say in my case, it actually gives me an inflated sense of self-esteem. And the reason for that is one time I was in Tesco and I bumped into an old dance teacher from school, and it was summer, and he said, "It's a gorgeous day today." And I went, "Oh, thank you." And years ago, I probably would have been very embarrassed about mishearing something like that. But now I just kind of like bask in the compliments that nobody's actually paying me, and I think I'm hearing. And in that regard, I'm very comfortable talking about my disability and disclosing that, whether that's on the stage at a stand-up gig, whether that's on First Dates Ireland, or more relevantly today, disclosing that in the workplace. So if we go to the next slide, the first point I've said there is that disclosing your disability, it is very unique to you, and I think disclosing that in the workplace, that is very much a personal choice. But I just want to jump to that last point there. There is no legal requirement to disclose your disability in the workplace, but if you don't disclose it, then your employer isn't going to know what reasonable accommodations to put in place to help you do your job. So I would like, for me personally, from my personal experiences, I understand just how daunting it can be to disclose a disability during the recruitment process. And that's from at the start of my career, when talking about some of the challenges I might have, such as difficulty hearing over the phone. I think I was told very, very early on in my career, about 14 years ago or so, well, look, that's going to be an issue for us if you can't hear over the phone. And it's very hard not to internalize that and see your own disability as a problem, as a barrier. So for me, it's taken a long time to see that disability is not a barrier whatsoever. It's more disabling attitudes, society, those are barriers. But thankfully, just with organizations like Open Doors Initiative and its sister organization, Employers for Change, they're doing really great work in promoting diverse and inclusive workplaces. And like I know I've seen a real shift in the last 10 years, just in attitudes in the workplace. People want a more diverse team. They want to be more inclusive. So what was my point I was going to make there? I would encourage you to feel comfortable in disclosing a disability to your workplace. Whether you do this at the recruitment stage, I think that is very personal to what kind of disability that you have. If you think that there's something in the job interview process that would help you, if there's an accommodation you need, then you should absolutely disclose that. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you need. And I think that, again, it can be daunting sharing that. But as Talita was saying earlier, practicing that and, practicing that with someone else and listening and getting some feedback on how that sounds, that can really help you. And I know that I mentioned earlier that I'm very comfortable talking about my disability and talking about the kind of challenges I faced. That's taken a long time to get there, and it's only with practice. And I'm so glad that I've persisted with that, because it has paid off. Another point I just wanted to make is that, remember, you're the expert in knowing your own capabilities and your limitations. But also remember, even though you're the expert in your own disability, that doesn't mean that the responsibility is entirely on you to ensure that, you've got the right accommodations in the workplace. That's very much a two-way street. And so that could mean for employers to have regular check-ins with an employee who has a disability. Are these accommodations working for you? Is there anything you'd like us to try differently? So I would work very closely to anyone who's employing someone with a disability, work very closely and check in on them to make sure that the supports they have in place are working for them. So Drury, for instance, are hiring at the moment. So for anyone who's interested in a career in public relations or public affairs, check out our LinkedIn page. Keep an eye out for any jobs that we may post. And of course, my door is always open if anyone has any questions. So that's it from me. I'm going to, I hope it was useful. Thanks for listening. I'm going to mute myself now and hand you back over to Talita and the other speakers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was great. So our next speaker is Dr. Vanessa Lacey. Vanessa, can you please introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yeah, thanks a million, Talita, and thanks a million, Erin, as well. Hard to follow that. I suppose, for me in this area of work, and I've worked in this area for 17 years. I've gender transitioned at 43 years of age. And now you're kind of doing the maths now, and it's like I'll be 60 in a month's time. Now, I know I look 30 years older than that, so I just want to put that out there first of all. So I think in terms of positive disclosure, for almost a third of my life, I've worked in the area, and I've studied in the area for trans and non-binary issues. I left school at 14 years of age with no qualifications whatsoever, not even an intercert, because of the stress that I would have had in my adolescent years in terms of a conflict with my gender identity, which meant then I left school at 14 years of age with no qualifications. So when I started transitioning at 43, I decided to educate myself. So I set out to work because I had to work, and also to educate myself in a parallel way, and gender transition. So there's 3 tracks going forward on that. So in 2010, I was lucky enough to get a job with a transgender NGO called TENI, Transgender Equality Network Ireland. I worked there for 11 years. At the time, I was halfway through a psychology degree. So really, I didn't need to disclose in that job because it was kind of a safe place. But I need to disclose to everybody else, whether it was a taxi driver who asked me why I was going to UCD or going to a certain talk, I had to disclose to everybody. And I think in terms of a positive disclosure, for me, it was a way of educating people, of putting it up on a platform for people who maybe are misinformed about people's experience, trans and non-binary people's experience. It gave me an opportunity to speak about them. I set up a business 2.5 years ago. I left Henny in 2021, and I decided to set up my own business because I had to be employed for another 6 years until I retire anyway. And I set up a business and I called it Gendercare because it was about gender and I cared. So pretty simple. I worked in 3 different areas. One is in pathway navigation. So I support people and families in terms of the social aspects of gender transition. The second aspect is in terms of training, which I think really fits into positive disclosure, whether it's recruitment or gender transition in the workplace and policies. I think training is essential for people to understand why policies are in place as well. So I think, rather than being sometimes a tick box exercise, so maybe we'll have one training, I think, it's good to have an understanding in terms of why policies are in place. And the third aspect is in terms of research. I was delighted to be involved with the Open Doors initiative last year and being commissioned, I suppose, to do some research and to produce a toolkit for employers that was inclusive of non-binary and transgender people's experience. So that was a very proud moment for me back in November when we launched it. So very much delighted to be involved with Open Doors Initiative, and thanks again for inviting me on. So if you want to pop on to the next slide, that'd be fantastic. Thanks a million. So in terms of coming out, so I think, there's certain aspects of this are nuances. So in terms of, do I need to tell? Do I need to tell someone when I'm applying for a job? Well, there's many trans people who have transitioned maybe 5 or 10 or 20 years ago who really don't feel the need to expose what their gender was before in terms of saying, well, I'm transgender. They may be identifying as a man or a woman and feel that they don't need to divulge their gender history to a recruitment panel. However, there may be people who are in the process of gender transitioning and maybe planning to gender transitioning, or maybe a lot of the information that they have inside their CV maybe includes lots of information in terms of volunteering with trans or LGBT organizations. And that information may be very useful for them in terms of being successful in that recruitment. Also, in terms of maybe attending that interview. So if you get an interview and you get that letter or that email saying you're attending for an interview around this time, and you might feel anxious if you are in the process of gender transition, you're at the very beginning, and you might feel quite conscious about how you might present, if it is in-person interview. So maybe in terms of reducing that anxiety, I mean, you're going to be anxious about maybe attending the interview in itself. So maybe, and it's all around reducing any anxiety you can have, so you can, talk quite openly and feel empowered to do so. So maybe contact maybe the HR person in that organization, to maybe have a discussion to say that, like, maybe because the recruitment panel, none of them may have had trans awareness. So there might be a fear about being mispronounced, there might be a fear about being misnamed, there might be fear about the whole conversation going down the alley in terms of the person's gender transition, which is really nobody's business but their own. But they may just want to put it on record so it can maybe decrease some of the anxiety that they feel. But again, as Erin said, you don't have to legally share that information. If it is a particularly sensitive post and you're working with vulnerable people, you may have to go through Garda clearance, and you don't need to tell the organisation about that. You may just need to connect in with Garda, and all that information then is totally confidential. In terms of,
Also,
you know what, Toledo. Yeah?
1 minute, if that's okay.
Sweet Jesus, already. Oh my God.
We're already over one. I'm giving you an extra 2.
Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to pop on to the next slide, so that'll be brilliant. So again, in terms of being empowered, and I'll easily cover this in 1 minute, in terms of being empowered, you know, to develop that plan, you know, have that plan, talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues in the workplace. If you're thinking of coming out in the workplace, talk to them, see what they think. In terms of talking in the mirror, yes, absolutely, that can be helpful. Or talking to colleagues, you can link into the employment resource group if you have one. You may want to link in with HR and have that discussion in terms of, you know, in before maybe you come out to other colleagues in the workplace. Some people might just want to tell HR and move on and make sure that they have them accommodations. Maybe their uniform is in place. Maybe that agreement of using then bathrooms and other spaces are confirmed before you might go out on that road. So in terms of really the messages, and they just crossover with a lot of our presentations, but I would think that, you know, having those discussions and feeling empowered is one of the most important aspects of that. And talking to friends and colleagues and people maybe within the organization is super important in terms of feeling that way. So I'm sure I'm within the 5 minutes now, Toledo, so I'll hand back to yourselves.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. So now we have Damien, our third speaker, Damien Quinn. Damien, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody, and thanks to the Open Doors Initiative for having me on. You can hear me okay? Yeah. I'm the founder of Spéire. Spéire is the Irish for New Horizons, and it was interesting at the start of this presentation to talk about choice. Like what I support people with is disclosure around criminal histories, and like that isn't really a choice in certain jobs. And very often you see language on job applications where it says having a criminal conviction might prevent you from securing the post, or Garda vetting will apply, that type of thing. And it is a really, really, I suppose, demotivating situation to find yourself in when you're trying to share your qualities, your attributes to somebody that is able to give you an opportunity, only to then have to go back to a part of your life that you're trying to move on from and get away from and progress from. So it really, really is hard to kind of balance that act. Can we do this next slide, please? So what we do is we absolutely, like, we sit with people and we talk about acknowledging the fact that there is something in our past that we're not very proud of and that we'd like to move on from. Many people go to prison and they use prison as like kind of a refuge and a place to become educated, to reflect, to plan, and to look forward to a better future. The problem is, like, people like myself, we were quite naive in those assumptions, you know. We understood that prison was where the punishment was taking place. And then after prison, or when we were free to leave, that we'd be free to move on with our life in a constructive way, that the punishment was now over. But Maynooth University done some really interesting work on this around the secondary punishment, you know, living with the label. It's like it doesn't go away. Like, so the Spent Convictions Act is there, and that's usually for minor offences. It might be one offence, and then after 7 years, you no longer have to disclose that, and it no longer shows up on your record. But that regime doesn't apply to 99% of people with criminal histories. And the Act itself is there to protect children and vulnerable adults from anybody that has the capacity to endanger them. But if you were to go into a prison, the mainstream population of the prison, and tell them people that they are now categorized as a risk to children and vulnerable adults, they would be horrified, because most people in prison do not see themselves as that. Most people in prison are in prison because they're punished for being poor. They've done things to survive, that type of thing. So from our point of view, having to disclose is quite a negative process. So what we've done is we developed a model of strengths-based disclosure, which captures the work that you've done on yourself since that time. It brings the person right up to date and gives a snapshot of where the person is at today, rather than where they used to be. We look at various things like interpersonal trust, health and well-being, motivation to change. What did you learn from the situation? How would you do things differently should that situation arise again? Coping mechanisms and strategies for moving away from a life that everybody doesn't want to be a part of anyways. Nobody grows up and wants to find themselves involved in crime. Nobody grows up, or it says growing up, I want to be a ex-offender. These things happen out of desperate situations. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to support people in validating their steps out of a life of crime, and supporting them as they seek opportunity. Can we go to the next slide, please? So highlighting examples of positive change, like there's this theory of desistance. Desistance is abstinence from offending behavior, and that usually is measured from the day when a person leaves prison. But the reality is people actually seek out pro-social activities in prison. Last Wednesday, I was with a load of prisoners inside in the progression unit, and they were singing in a choir with Solace, and it was an absolutely moving event just to see these guys that have moved from a life of crime and violence to be standing up on stage singing their hearts out. It was just an amazing thing to see. So people seeking pro-social activities in prison, that is the start of change, and that should also be captured in that measurement too. The critique I have on desistance theory is that it is waiting for people to fail. Measuring that is actually waiting on people to fail. What we are very interested in doing is kind of promoting all of the good things since that time. One of the best interviews I had, it happened by accident. It was with a voluntary situation. It was community games, and a good man, he's no longer with us, unfortunately, but the conversation came up around Garda vetting, and I just said, look, I'm going to have to stop you there. There's stuff from my past you probably need to be made aware of. I don't want you to look like a fool when you go back to the community games. So he thought about it for a second, and he sat back, and then he sat back into me then, and he said, well, what have you done since that time? And nobody ever asked me that in a interview situation. It was always when I disclosed, they wanted to know more about the crime and what I was involved in. I got caught with drugs and I was fighting, that type of thing. But he actually was more interested in what I had done since that time. What had I done to change? And I couldn't even get it all out quick enough. I'd done lots of work on myself, and so I gathered it, gave it to him, and he brought it away. And it took 3 months to get me over the line into that voluntary role. But he didn't give up. He put his neck on the line, and I got the role after 3 months. But if that was an employment situation, no employer would wait for 3 months just for me with my baggage to get the job, So in essence, and to wrap up, Garda vetting in its current format is disabling rather than enabling, And what we have done is we've developed a positive disclosure tool that we can build portfolios of commitment to change, get that validated on the benchmark set out by the criminal justice sector, and then certified with a certificate of commitment to change that people can use when they have to go and answer those challenging questions. So once again, listen, thank you to the Open Doors Initiative for this, and it's really, really good to be part of this. I'm sure I'm looking forward to the panel at the end.
Thank you so much, Damien. So now we have Clodagh as our fourth and final speaker. Clodagh has stepped up this morning as our speaker. James had an emergency, I couldn't make it, so thank you so much, Clodagh. Can you
No
please
problem.
introduce yourself?
I'm Clodagh from Exchange House Ireland, which is the national traveller organisation here in the city centre, Dublin. I'm the CE supervisor there, and ours is a little bit different to any other CE. We are 80% education and 20% work. So we're trying to give back to the community more. I've been working in the community and youth sector for 10 years plus. If you want to go on to the next slide. I'm speaking on behalf of jobbers, so this isn't my experience, it's experience from talking to any of, now when I say lads, it's because currently at the moment, over the past 2 years, it's been all males that are on my programme, so that's why I say lads most of the time, just so you know. But within the job that I'm in and from getting the feedback from everybody, a lot of them won't actually disclose that they're a member of the community if they don't have to. And their exact words are, is the minute I do that, I will not get hired. An awful lot of them have also said, and I can speak from experience from working alongside with them, that they don't have to even disclose because their name itself is a giveaway. People don't even, they assume with that name, then they connect the dots basically. An awful lot of the young men that I work with at the moment would feel, if you were to ask them now, how would you feel about applying for a job, going for an interview, etc., etc., they would feel, in particular, let's say, for example, there a couple of weeks ago, there was the Garda, sorry, I've lost the word in my head, but they were recruiting. And I went in, I said, look, they were actually recruiting the whole lot straight away. Every single one of them went, absolutely no way. Not a hope would they hire me, not a hope would they allow us in there because we're members of the traveller community. That was their words, not mine. It's still even in 2024, it's still that way, unfortunately. There are a few that would very happily say, I am who I am, please accept me, and that's it. But the biggest factor is there is a massive fear of discrimination from the second that they send their CV via email, or from the second that they make a phone call, from their accent, things like that, from their name, everything like that. I can give one example. There is a person that I'm working with currently at the moment who has an excellent CV, has great education, has massive experience behind them. We have, at the moment, over the past couple of weeks, we have sent out, I think, 25, 30 applications for jobs. We haven't received one response back. Now, he has stated that's from my name and my address, because they would live on a site and the name particularly would stand out in a sense. And he hasn't had any luck in getting work. And he would like to work in community development, but as he said, most likely I'm going to end up having to either work in a traveller specific organisation if he's to go into it to get the chance, or he'll end up having to go into construction, which is something that he doesn't want to do. They do feel extremely unfairly treated when it comes to actually gaining employment. Assumptions are automatically made in and around it where they're not even given the chance. They feel if they were given the chance, they can prove themselves, but that chance isn't actually been given there. If you want to move on to the next slide. But with the work that we're doing here with them and the whole lot, they want to be and want to disclose who they are. They're very proud of who they are, where they've come from. They're very proud of their heritage and the whole lot. But as I said previously, it is a massive barrier for them. They feel, and that's why an awful lot of them, and when I'm saying the age that the young people that, well, I say young people that I'm dealing with are 18 to 22 is who I'm working with, and these are the ones that are actually saying this, that's still there. And even the older generations have said the same. An awful lot of times what would happen is most travellers would create a business of their own, and from that, that's where the employment stream would come down. They would then hire other travellers, etc., etc., which is a good thing as well, but it shouldn't have to be that way either. But as I said, being a member of the traveller community and disclosing that is completely your own decision, no matter what job you go for. And it's important to promote the inclusivity and our values as in the respects of the members of the traveller community, rather than discriminating against them. And here in Exchange House, we're doing an awful lot of work along them lines with them every day. We're working with people, and we're working with people nationally as well. So I'm sorry, I probably went very quick there, did I?
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much, Clodagh.
Thank you.
So now we'll have a short panel discussion with our speakers about their own lived experience with disclosure. So if all the speakers feel free to unmute yourselves or keep yourselves on mute until you speak, whatever you prefer. So I'm going to start with a question for everyone. I'm not going to ask you to introduce yourselves again because you've already done that. But I wanted to ask if you could share your experience with disclosure in the workplace or in the recruitment process, maybe share a story about a specific challenge that you've encountered and how you navigated these challenges. And maybe, Clodagh, when we get back to you, maybe you have an example from one of the people you work with. But I'd like to start with Erin, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I think that's like anytime I've disclosed, like, well, with Drury in particular, you know, disclosing my hearing loss in the job interview, it was met very positively. I had very open questions from the interviewers who wanted to know more about how I communicate. So just on a point that Clodagh said about, you know, feeling proud about disclosing something, I would say that I'm very proud about disclosing that I'm deaf. And I'd always say to people, like, even though the limitation with deafness might be difficulty hearing, that doesn't mean I'm a bad listener. I'm actually a very good listener. And it's made me a better communicator in many ways. I think that, and one thing for me is I need to see people's faces when communicating, and that's to lip read. But also, I think that when you've got eye contact with someone, I feel like they're tuned in to, that's like holding some kind of connection. And when you've got that connection holding, I feel like I'm gonna hear them better because they're giving me their full attention. Some challenges though has been, I mentioned earlier about reasonable accommodations being like an ongoing process. So I can hear on the phone with a cochlear implant, but that doesn't mean that I should be doing phone calls all day. And the reason for that is because I would get a lot of listening fatigue as someone with hearing loss, and that can lead to cognitive overload and a little bit of burnout. And I could be too tired to focus on the next task. So some accommodations that I would have here are limiting the amount of phone work I have to do, like avoiding back-to-back meetings where possible, and also just going back to disclosing my disability in the interview process. When I started, the CEO of the company said something to me that I never even considered, and that was, in an open plan office, that could get really loud for you and you might get tired of listening to the noise. I would suggest booking in time slots for yourself into one of the private meeting rooms to do some work in the afternoons. And that was a terrific suggestion. It's something I do, and that really helps combat the listening fatigue.
Amazing. Thanks, Erin. Vanessa, what about you? Are there any specific challenges that you've encountered? Maybe it doesn't have to be in the workplace, you've said, maybe in a personal setting, or any positive examples that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think really I gave this one some thought, but I definitely think it's the negative attitude and negative narrative that it's out there towards transgender people. Whether it's from so-called comedians or whether it's from the comedians in the media who think that we are cannon fodder. So I think really it's the negative attitudes, and that can be a barrier for people coming out. As I mentioned, you know, there is people who feel that they never want to disclose, that they're already living their lives and there's no need for it. They don't feel there's any need. But there's a situation that can arise there, Talitha, where you have the negative narratives in the workplace. Even though the trans person is present, their colleagues don't know the person is transgender, and still having the conversations, negative conversations about transgender people. And that can also translate to families as well. So you have family members of transgender people having to listen to this negative narrative from either something that has been in the newspapers, or something that has been on the television, or something that they saw on social media, or some of the misinformation that's out there about transgender people. And that can be really negative, impactful to transgender people. I've experienced that, but I've worked for transgender, and I'm quite proud to be a transgender person. So I'm very out. So if I apply for a job, and if I have applied for jobs, I mean, it's in my history. I've done 17 years professional and academic experience in this area. So really, I just put it out there. But other more vulnerable people are more vulnerable. So I think in terms of how to get around that, in terms of my experience at working in this area, again, as I mentioned earlier on, is training. I mean, we have to train people, and we have to make sure we have to have that zero tolerance in the workplace. That, as much as we might have a rainbow up on our website and an EDI team, we need to be talking the talk as well, really, in terms of making sure that negative narrative doesn't appear, not just because we have a transgender person or not. You could have, that's the issue. And you certainly could have a family member in there as well.
Thank you, Vanessa. Damien, what about you? Do you have an example you could share?
Yeah, well, I suppose after searching for work and not getting anywhere, I see somebody in the chat there has done like 56 applications. Wayne is there in the chat. Like you keep asking and asking and asking and being told no. Like it really does affect your resiliency and your like in my own case it affected my mental health. And it was only when I resigned to the fact that, you know what, I'm probably not going to get a job, and I accepted that as a fact. I started to feel better about myself. And then I found education then, and I started studying business and community development. And I heard this idea of empowering marginalized people and empowering marginalized communities. And that made sense to me, and it was a way in which for me to give back and that type of stuff. So, and right throughout my studies, then I was really, I started to realize, there's something seriously wrong here with the whole Garda vetting process, is keeping so many generations of people locked out of opportunity, whether that's a house, a job, volunteering, education, insurance, all these different things. And I really started to believe that needed to change. So, so the positive is kind of them ideas on college paperwork coming to life and becoming our project, and working with people leaving prison, and working with probation, and working with good people like Wayne there as well. People that have been there, been through that, and the authentic relationships that are built up, the support network that we are starting to harness. It's absolutely it is a positive experience to go on and set up that project. And of course, working with Galway Rural Development, it'd be amiss not to mention them. Like they now have a directive to support people with criminal histories. All local development companies across Ireland do, and they have been hugely supportive in me setting up this project too. And it would be amiss not to give them a shout out and thanks for the support as well as part of this. But yeah, that's kind of my negatives and positives. So.
Brilliant, thank you, Damien. Clodagh, what about you? I know you've shared an example already, but do you have anything else you would like to share?
There was a particular example that one of my lads told me this morning, kind of blending with Damien there. He had a criminal history, or has a criminal history, and while he was in prison, there is the initiatives of being able to come out and do different things. But his mother is a member of the traveller community, but his father wasn't. So his surname is something that you wouldn't automatically think is from the travelling community. So he was set to go to a particular project and to be working there. And somebody in the system called him aside, asked him, hang on, are you a member of the traveller community? And he openly said, yeah, my mum is a member of the community, my dad wasn't, that's why I have this specific surname. That's grand. And a couple of days later, he was taken off going to the program that he was supposed to go to, and was automatically then kind of told, no, you're not coming. outside of here, you're not getting that chance. But he currently has received a chance because he's currently on our program here, which is great. But that was an experience that he did have previously, and it wasn't from, as he said, he's like, look, people, that's just the way they are. You can't change people at the end of the day. But he goes, he would be very proud to say he is a member of the community, and he wouldn't hide it. You know, the only reason is he's given his father's surname and that's it. You know, but he would be very proud to be who he is. But he said it was a big example of something. It's not just happening with people who, when you're going for employment, this is happening inside prison services that are here as well. So,
Yeah, that's awful.
No, I only found that because I just happened to ask him this morning. I said, yeah, you know, about this. I was explaining to him I was coming on this and the whole lot, and he goes, I've got it one for you. And he told me that. So I was like, right, I think that's a good example as well, because it's kind of going for anybody who is still within the system and the whole lot. It's kind of good for them possibly to know as well that, you know, things can happen. Now, as he said, not everybody there is the same. It was just one particular person who called him aside, who kind of had made the decision he was a traveller before they even asked. But, you know, it just happened that way, whereas he hasn't had any bad experiences with anybody else. You know, so far it's been good for him in that sense. And he is currently here with us as well.
Yeah, and I think that highlights the importance of having organizations like Exchange House and so many others working in different spaces to support individuals who have a criminal conviction or who are from the traveler community, because it's difficult to find that support maybe in other organizations, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Clodagh, for sharing. I'm going to skip a couple of questions because we're running out of time. And also, I think most of them have been answered already. But I'd like to ask Vanessa, do you have any advice or tips for evaluating if a company, if a workplace is inclusive for trans employees before deciding if the person is going to disclose or not?
Yeah, I think really do your research. Go online, have a look and have a look at the company's website. Have a look and see if they've got an equality, diversity, inclusion team. Have they won any awards? I mean, there's some fantastic organizations and services out there now that have fantastic EDI teams and have won awards for that as well. I mean, if you're in, I mean, I mean, that's when you're talking about big organizations, but in more smaller places, just again, check them out. Go for a cup of coffee there. Go for a drink in there. Go in and into the shop itself. I find really positively, Talita, that the more shops I go into, I can see more and more trans people working in there. So there's a big change, a sea change, really, despite some of the negative narratives and negative attitudes towards trans people that are portrayed in the media. That trans people are very resilient and getting on with life, and they're in pennies and they're in Duns and they're in Mr. Price and they're in the HSE, and we're in all parts of Irish life. And I think that's very positive. So do your research, explore, talk to some people, and try and establish then how safe that place is. And if you don't deem it to be that safe, then maybe not apply.
Thanks, Vanessa. And just to wrap up, I'd like to ask the four of you if you have one piece of advice in a couple of sentences, because we don't have that much time, for people who are feeling anxious about disclosing. What would you say? We can start with you, Vanessa, since you're already talking.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate empowerment, I think really just to write it down, write it out. If you have a plan, write it out, talk to people. As you said, talk in the mirror. But yeah, feel empowered, definitely.
Thank you. Damien?
I suppose the main thing would be with anybody from my kind of a background to reach out to us and contact us and have a chat with us. You know, we are here to help people kind of validate their commitment to change, and that's what we do. So if you have, like, I would say from a personal point of view as well, never give up, refuse to bend, and people just accept yourself for who you are, and accept the fact that people in general, you know, they don't have to accept you for who you are. That's their choice. Once you know who you are and what you're all about, that should be all you need to get by. and we help people with all that type of stuff. And we're here. So thanks for having us on the call.
Thanks, Damien. Clodagh?
Very similar to what Damien said there. We're here, and thanks for having us here. But basically, you do what you need to do when you feel comfortable when it comes to employment. At the end of the day, it's about you. It's about who you are, and people can be accepting, they cannot be, but it is completely your own choice and your own decision. And Exchange House is always here to help. Thank you
Thanks,
for having
Clodagh.
us, by the way.
Thank you. Erin?
I would say that just remind yourself, it can be daunting making the decision to disclose something, but you have just as much to offer to a workplace as everyone else does, and you legally have an equal right to opportunity. So just remember that and keep that in mind.
Thanks, Erin. So we do have 3 minutes for questions, if there are any. I was trying to go through the chat. There's a lot of comments. Very happy to see these comments, but I couldn't find any questions. I don't know. Lydia, could you see any questions there on the chat?
Yeah, I see a very interesting question. How do you disclose medical conditions like HIV in case of accidents and emergencies in the workplace?
Difficult.
You disclose medical conditions like HIV in case of accidents and emergencies in the workplace.
Yeah, I think we covered a little bit of that in the earlier slides in terms of, how sometimes your why can be because in a medical emergency or something or an accident, you just want people to be aware of something specific. So I think it would be exactly the same advice and guidance that we gave here, like prepare yourself, go through the reason, the what you're going to share, who you're going to talk to, prepare a personal statement so you're comfortable with that, and just make sure you're in a comfortable place as well when you're doing that in a private setting, so that it's not a busy place where people might overhear and people who you're not that comfortable with knowing that information about yourself. It should absolutely be treated as confidential. I would remind the person just in case. But yeah, anyone else has any other advice for this question? Nope. Okay. Any other questions, Lydia, on the chat?
You can see.
If anyone has a question, if you can use the raise hand function as well, and I will enable your microphone. We do have maybe time for one more question.
Maybe there is a question for Damien. How relevant is the spanned conviction bill?
Yeah, well, look, I suppose I kind of covered that a little bit in that the Spent Convictions Act only goes so far. With say you might have a driving offence, you will get that spent up to 7 years, or you might have one public order offence. But usually, when you get a public order offence, there's usually 3 together, so that's not one. So, but it doesn't go anywhere near far enough in that, like 99% of people don't benefit from that act. I see Wayne has his hand up there. You want to add him in there? Yeah.
I just allowed your microphone, Wayne, if you want to unmute yourself.
How's it going, everybody? Thanks for the chat today. Yeah, just in relation to the spent conviction bill, I engaged with Lynn Rowan when she was doing putting forward the new spent conviction bill, and my research was using it, but that spent conviction bill is not worth the paper it's written on. It's like you said there, Damien, if you get a driving offence and you get 3, it doesn't count. So if you have, say, 2 convictions for television license, they won't be wiped because you have 2. And they only cover up like 12 months and suspended sentences. So anyone that has actually got a sentence, they won't wipe them. There's nothing. There's nothing. I would see it though as a springboard for down the road. You know what I mean? It's a foundation, but a lot of work and time has to go into it. I put forward proposals and they were just kind of rejected. I put forward things like if you had, say, your convictions were in the district court, you were, up to 2 years only. if you were out of trouble for 5 years, you know, and you're working on good behaviour, hadn't come to attention of the guards, or maybe they could be wiped. Then say if it was you had circuit court convictions, if you're out of trouble for 10 years, you know, they should be looked at getting wiped. And say, you know, the higher the court goes, the longer you're out of trouble. You know, my last conviction was in 1997. I got out of prison in 2005. But as you said, Damien, my people only look at from 2005. So although I was sentenced in 1997, I'm being punished since 2005. People tell you I'm out of trouble since 2005. No, I'm out of trouble since 1996. I was convicted in 1997. I was released from prison in 2005. You're talking, you know, nearly 30 years ago, and my convictions are still to this day. I'm out of work at the moment, and I've recently put in over 70 applications, and you know I am getting interviews at this stage. But when they're hearing convictions, they're coming back with, oh, well, you haven't got a full driver's license, and yet the criteria doesn't mention the full driver's license. It says desired. So they do come back with ways of, you know, discriminating against you without actually saying we don't want you because you have criminal convictions, you know. And I believe that, and as you know, Damon, I was involved in band the box in the UK a number of years ago, you know, where if you have a question, say for example, question 5, have you criminal convictions? Yes. Question 6, how many? Can you please elaborate on the convictions? I have 56 convictions. I'm not even getting 3 or 4 into that small box, you know what I mean? I'm not going to say I have 56 convictions, you know. So at that point, you're being discriminated against at the application process, you know, and that's something I think we should look at here in Ireland.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Wayne. Yeah, so I'm sorry, but we're gonna have to wrap up. We're already 3 minutes behind schedule, but thanks everyone for joining, and thank you so much for all the speakers. This was excellent. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm hoping all the attendees did too. So thanks everyone. Have a lovely day, and hope to see you all again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.